Hi guys, welcome. I'm Simon. I'm just going to show you a couple of easy techniques to work at home using normal kind of equipment that you might have at home, like for example a serrated bread knife, maybe a little household cutting block, and of course your foam that we've been giving you to use. You can also use cardboard. We've got the 1mm here, and I'll show you a few techniques on how to get that happening. So let's start with the block of foam that we've given you. This is a simple process of rough cutting to get your basic forms, and for that we'll use the little bread knife that we've got here. Now it's important you choose a bread knife that's got a thin blade preferably, and something with very fine serrations. That will work really well on the foam and it won't tear out the foam too much. Okay, so if we need to break our block down into a manageable piece, we can simply start by doing a sawing motion. Now it's going to take a little while and we'll work our way around the block. So if you're doing a fairly substantial depth cut through the foam, you're really best to put it on a firm surface like a strong solid table, and try and use the blade to push down against the table, away from yourself at all times. This is really important. You do not want to be drawing the blade to yourself or holding the block in any way that is unstable. Okay, so let's just keep working using the force of gravity against the table surface and work away with the knife edge. Okay, so this is going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of caution to do reasonably well, but it's worth the effort. Okay, now it's not ideal, but it's a good start. We've got one good surface, and you can use that as your datum with all your setouts. You can start as your point of origin on those good cuts, and then we can have this area as a sacrificial area. We're going to work away with that. So just keeping all the particles that are loose into the bin. This is going to keep the rest of your household a lot happier. This stuff, being polystyrene, is very light, and if you don't contain it straight away, it can end up floating around the house. So do make sure you keep it into a contained bin as soon as you're using it. Okay, it's just a great way to work, and you can come back and vacuum it later, but if you let it sit for a day or two, it'll be everywhere. So make sure to keep it in close. Anyway. Okay, so with the fine serrations on the blade, you've got a good chance, if you use a fine sawing motion or action, of getting a pretty good result, even on the first cuts. Okay, so that's not tearing out too much, it's pretty smooth, and if you go for a shallow cut, you can work away and get an even smoother result. So the good idea here is to take bites at it, little pieces at a time, as you work your way to the shape you want. Okay, rather than trying to do it all in one big cut, you're much better off to pare away at it. And this will give you a chance to gain some control and some confidence with the process and the way the whole thing works. And just keep in mind at all times that, you know, this is quite light material, and it's going to tend to want to roll when you're cutting it, so be very mindful of that. Make sure you press it down on the surface at all times, and you're putting more force through the material to the board and the table than you are to the knife. Please remember, whenever possible, keep the wide side down like this, not this way. This way is a lot more stable and therefore a lot safer. So if you can work across the job, you're going to have a lot more safety in an action like that, no matter what the shape is you're cutting, than if you're cutting it vertically. Okay, now vertically is fine for some things, but if you're using a vertical stance with the material, make sure you're bracing it very firmly and you're only taking very small cuts. Okay, little pieces at a time, like this for example. Lots of fine sawing. Don't try and do large movements. You want to saw and use the serrations of the blade on the bread knife to do all the work for you. Okay, so look, that's a really cheap and cheerful. We'll go this way to take the edges off that are a bit rough. Okay, so we're getting the makings of a hand grip happening here. Okay, and now we can start the process of shaping it. Okay, so now we've got some sandpaper. I'm using the 60 grit to start. And if we fold it in half and then tear it along here, we'll get a rough piece that we can use And if we need a shape, we can use pretty much anything. A paper towel roll, for example, will work quite well. any form that you want. You can use a piece of dowel, any different diameter material, and using that you can come into the area where you're sanding, which is directly above your bin. Now at this stage you might want to lift the bin up onto the table or sit it on a chair. Be creative with this, and away we go. So what we're getting here is very fast and reasonably accurate shaping of your rough cut block. Now remember, the knife that we were using before was just to rough cut the form. You get all the detail by sanding. Okay, so you can see it's quite a fast process. We can start to indent and get a nice radius at each end, and it's starting to get a form that might be the sort of thing you'd be comfortable to hold on to. Just very lightly shed the dust into the bin, and away we go to the other side. So we're starting to get a form that might be something quite comfortable to grip onto at the rear of a hand grip. We're starting to get a form. It might be like a hand grip. Okay, now this might be where we use a different block. So I'll just use that, and we can then get a little piece, that was this, and our other piece, and we can wrap that around like that. Okay, and this is where we come in and start doing and now we will pick this up again. So at the moment we're just using the coarser grit because we're removing quite a lot of material quite fast, and if you want to impart a much finer, smoother surface to the polystyrene block, that's where you'll move down to a finer grade of paper. So this is 60 grit we're using at the moment, but we can also give you some 100. You can use 100 or 150 quite happily on this sort of material. And if you want a very high finish quality, you can even go down to 240. Okay, so that's starting to take shape, starting to look a bit like a grip. So a good way to work doing this sort of thing, as you could see before, we started off doing the major outside perimeter forms, and then you can start whittling away and coming in to pick up the details. But at least you started with a good clear set of boundaries to work from. That keeps it symmetrical. And you can see if we turn this around, the facets are picking up the light. That's a really good way to work. And now we can move down to a finer grade of paper. So now we're going to swap our paper. That was our 60 grit. We've got a piece of 150 grit paper here. Same thing, just wrapping it around the form that we're going to use. Come back over to the bin so that the sandpaper is dropping its little pieces of grit into the bin. And this will give a much finer finish on the sand to the surface of the polystyrene. And straight away you can see those facets are starting to become a better, higher quality, smoother surface. So you can see it doesn't take long to do this. It can actually be quite fast. If you've got a form in mind and you want to pursue that form using these simple techniques, you'll get a really quick result. You can swap it around a bit every now and again to get a fresh section of the sandpaper. Okay, now I'm going to move to one of the flat pieces of paper, just to get a few more of the refinements we want. So moving with the flat, we're just changing over from the 60 to the 150. And you can see straight away here that's got a little bit of a texture to the surface, if I can get the light on that. And if we move that like this, it's going to be a great result. Now if you're flat sanding, please remember you've got a very good ally here, which is your sanding board, and that's made really simply. A little bit of maybe some glue and board. If you apply the glue to the back of a fresh sheet of paper, like this one, and just rub it all over there, press the paper down onto the board, and you'll get a great result. So that's a really simple board, 2 sheets of paper, usually 2 different grades. So if we're trying to do that fine smooth sanding, we can sit the board on the table and then draw the part across the material. Now this is so good because it's so accurate. Instead of having to worry about a piece of paper potentially moving around on different angles, you can actually hold the section that you want to sand and gently glide it across the surface. And that way you've got a great degree of control and accuracy. You get a beautiful finish on the sanding within a few seconds. So we've got the 150, the finer grit, and we're just going to use that now to round a few things here. Now we can also do this by passing the material, the object, and being sanded across the sanding boards on a flat surface. But if you need freehand, you can do that very well as well with this. So you can see what we're achieving here. We're trying to work away at that surface with a much smoother finish on it. So there you go. You see the advantage of using a bin. That's saving our floor and the rest of the space from getting covered in fine sanding dust. So please make sure you work over an open bag bin like this. Very important. Okay. Well, there you go. That's pretty much the first stage done and almost finished. You can fine detail that to your heart's content with whatever other applications you might want. So there you go. Very, very simple materials and equipment. And you can get a quick result working at home. Make sure you have a bin to collect all the dust. Happy modelling.